The following is a special series of the Darden Ideas to Action podcast, focusing on the power of disruptive innovations.
Good Disruption, a lively discussion between UVA Darden School of Business professors Yael Grushka-Cocaine and Mike Lennox on cutting-edge technologies and practices that are challenging the status quo.
All right, good day. Great to see you, Yael.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm very excited about today's topic, but before we jump into that, I just wanted to do kind of an update on our series here. We released our podcast on cryptocurrency the same week that cryptocurrencies basically collapsed. And I think there's a causation here. And
Yes.
I just want to thank our millions of listeners out there for listening to our advice on cryptocurrencies and heeding our advice. So
Bring
it's just great to see, cause and effect here, release of our podcast, the collapse of the crypto market.
That's wonderful, Mike. Careful what you wish for. We might be bringing upon ourselves millions of dollars in lawsuits because we are the cause for people losing a lot of money.
At the data scientist, I thought you were going to point out, correlation does not cause causation. So I was expecting to get that.
Well, maybe
response.
I should point out that the data point of 1 doesn't really say anything. So,
No, of course. Now that you've raised liability, now just forget what I just said
Thank
about
you.
the causality there. All right. So exciting topic today. So yeah, what are we going to talk about?
Well, it's funny because we can't really nail down the title of today's session. We are so overwhelmed by the artistic juices that are flowing in this field. We're talking about what you like to call artistic AI, or art generated by AI, or AI-powered art, algorithmic art, creative AI. There are many, many different names to this field. Basically, the topic that I wanted to bring forward as a disruption that is occurring in the world around us is everything to do with the arts that is generated by a machine and based on some data. So we see this infusion in the world of fine arts, with paintings being generated in the styles of painters that have been long gone. We see this in the music industry, and we're going to hear a lot about that here today with our expert. Everything to do with AI composed music to AI generated new songs and new beats and new rhythms. But we can also see this in terms of AI-generated poems and literature and books and texts. It is everywhere, and it is a force to reckon with. So I'm excited to talk about it.
I am really interested to hear about the machine part. But before we do that, just a level set, are you artistic personally? Do you play an instrument? Do you sing? What do you do?
I am 100% not artistic. When I was younger, I really liked to draw. I don't think I was ever that good at it, but I did like it. And interestingly, if you look at all of my creations when I was young, that some of them my mom kept and framed, I don't know why, but she's my mom. They are very structured and geometric in nature. So you would think that maybe a machine could have generated the types of things that I was doing as a youngster. I am not. My son is very talented. He has a very good music capability. He's a drummer. So
You probably didn't know this about me, but I actually played saxophone all the way through high school.
Maybe I did know that.
Yeah, but I think your point about being very mechanical, I think that's probably the way I played the saxophone.
We're engineers,
Yeah, I'm an engineer at heart, and whenever we did free form on jazz, I was at a loss there. So
were you in the marching band?
I was really cool in high school. Yeah. We could dig up some pictures and really embarrass myself.
I'm a big fan of the marching band. My son's in the marching band.
There you go. All right, so let's talk about the AI part of this, and
Yes.
maybe just a level set.
Yep.
Can you explain to the audience who maybe isn't really up to date on AI, what exactly is AI?
Yeah, what is artificial intelligence, especially in this context, because there are many different definitions. When we talk about AI generated, let's talk about fine arts, for instance. If we take a bunch of paintings, let's say Rembrandt paintings, the machine can study them. It can pull together features. It can learn from historical training set. We call that a training set. So the machine can learn and use it to come up with a recipe, kind of patterns that it spots in order to create something new, okay, in order to create a new prediction. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're talking about some kind of capability to learn, extract patterns, and then identify those patterns to make predictions about something new into the future.
And I would observe that some of the techniques that are being used today have really been around for decades. As an engineering student in the 90s, I was learning things like neural networks, basically mimicking the synapses in the brain to generate an artificial intelligence. I always like to say what's changed over the last 30, 40 years is, one, processing power.
Correct.
So the processing power we have today far outstrips what we had even in the early 90s. And then the second is the data. There's just so much more data available than there was in the past. And my understanding in some of these creative arts, they're leveraging the fact that online you can find, in essence, an infinite catalog of either pictures or artwork or music.
So the data in some ways perhaps was out there always, but it's now being digitalized and digitized in a way that is accessible to more people. So it's about the storage has improved. We can find places to put that data. We can share it more readily. And going back to the computing power that you talked about, we can process it and manipulate it in ways that those algorithms that have been around for a long time, as you say, can be utilized at much faster speed, faster pace, and at more accuracy, at a better accuracy rate. So they can produce a great output, much better in terms of their predictions because they have more data to build on and they can do it faster and bigger.
And I'm glad you mentioned predictions here, because I think what makes this topic in particular so fascinating is the creative part. So as many of you probably know, artificial intelligence has exploded over the last decade plus. A lot of the solutions that they're providing are in this predictive mindset, predicting different events, maybe predicting how a machine will work and the like. But what's fascinating about this topic is I think a lot of people maybe generally think, wait, this is where AI shouldn't be able to do it, right? They shouldn't be able to write original music. They shouldn't be able to generate an original painting. So how is this possible?
It is so fascinating because I was going to bring it up in the context of when we analyze and we think about this as a disruption, and we think about the threat that machine learning and technology and AI has always imposed. People typically think about the more mundane, automatic, routine type of operations that are rhythmic and repeated, that's where the displacement would happen, that's where people would lose their jobs. And here, indeed, we're talking today about this field, and we're going to talk about a lot of creative people, artists and writers and composers and musicians. How is it that we're standing or we might be viewing a technology that could leave these individuals without a job? Well, what's so interesting here, and going back to this idea of artificial intelligence and the boom that we're seeing right now, is that one of the capabilities that comes with this added access to data, large volumes of data, and fast processing capability is the sophistication to pick up patterns that are really hard for individuals to identify. So we cannot identify, if I just looked at the data if I could even look at the data, which I can't because of its size, but if I could, I wouldn't be able to detect with my eye some pattern. And therefore, the machine has an advantage because it can process all of this information and it can detect patterns. And so in the context of these creative fields, it's picking up on patterns and finding the recipe to create wonderful things that otherwise we wouldn't have been able to detect.
You know, the one that comes to mind that I've seen recently is the OpenAI project. If you're not aware, OpenAI was started by Elon Musk and others to create, in essence, an open platform for AI technology, feeling like it's so powerful it should really be shared with the world. And one of the latest and greatest AIs they've come out with is one called DALL-E 2. And so this one is a visual artist, and it has gotten to the point where you can type in verbal commands and it will draw the object for you. So you can, do whimsical stuff like, give me an otter on a bike, and it will draw you an otter on the bike.
My favorite one that I saw was Yayoi Kusama Pizza. Yayoi Kusama is an amazing artist from Japan who I adore, and I've chased around the world watching her art and looking at her exhibits, and now they're creating pizza images in her style.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that's also a fascinating piece here, is that the AI is able to train and understand different artistic styles. So you can say, give me a Rembrandt, give me a, impressionist, French impressionist type, or an anime type of drawing, and it is able to do that. It's just mind-blowing what these systems are able to do.
It goes back to the pattern detection. So a lot of this is about pattern detection. And I'll try to link this a little bit to the prediction component that we talked about earlier. What we're trying to ask is like, what is the chance that the pattern exists, or which pattern is the highest probability that it would represent this artist or will be in this style? And if you can rank those patterns and you can identify them, you can replicate them in the future. And so that's how these machine learning algorithms work. This is how the artificial intelligence is created. And it might be different and a little bit nuanced in different industries. So if we think about music, it might be different than in the fine arts versus in poetry or in literature, but it has its applicability in each.
Now, the classic test for AI has been when you are engaging with an AI and you don't know it. Like you're on a call with a call center and it's an AI and you think you're talking to a real human.
Or vice versa. Sometimes I think I'm talking to a robot and it's a real person.
Well, that's true. That's true. What's your sense? Like, are these drawings or these music that are being, or articles that are being written, do they pass that test, in your opinion? Can you tell that it's an AI, or are you like, oh, I just assumed it wasn't?
Well, some are better than others. So some fields are more advanced than others. I think the music industry is more advanced, and we'll hear from an expert in the field exactly how and where it's being adopted in large scale. Some of the platforms and the machines that you have described, like the DALL-E 2 and Google's equivalent, they're still a little bit clunky, and some of these images that are being created are clearly not quite up to speed in terms of us believing that it's a real deep fake creation. But it's a matter of not that much time until it will get there.
It's certainly better than I am, so I know it far outstrips my artistic ability.
Well, maybe that's a matter of taste. We always have the notion that art can be interpreted in a matter of taste.
No, I think there's a quality metric here, and that it far outstrips me on. Well, should we bring our expert in?
Yeah, Aaron Stepp, you are an expert. You got your PhD from University of Virginia, and you do a lot on software, music, and combine those two. How would you characterize your profession? A composer, a musician? Where do you stand these days?
Computer scientist?
I sit in a couple of places because I'm classically trained. I went to music school and conservatory for my undergraduate and master's, and then I came here to UVA for a computer music program, and my dissertation was a software library that I composed music with for instruments and a voice, and the poetry was a real human writing the poetry. So I kind of straddle a couple fences.
Oh, beautiful. And actually, you come from a family of musicians, right? Not only yourself, but I believe your father had a band. Is that true?
Both my parents were music educators for a very long time, and then my grandmother played the organ in churches for decades.
Amazing.
So we're establishing again, we have no artistic ability. You have a lot of artistic ability here. Yeah.
What would they say, or what do they say? I'm sure that you have these conversations with them all the time. What is their reaction to this notion that computers can generate and compose new creations and new pieces of music?
It's really interesting because, and I'm going to give a little story as a framework. When I was growing up, we'd listen to music when we were on road trips, and they'd tell me what I was hearing, like technically. So they'd say, this is this kind of a chord, or they're mixing it this way. And so I was always kind of aware of this kind of conversation and how we're thinking about it. And so my parents, relatively open-minded people, in my opinion, always want to say, is it good? And I think that's the big question that my parents and I have when they hear my music or music similar to mine, which I do a lot of different things, and a lot of my colleagues do all sorts of kind of amazing things with music. The question is it good? And it's a hard question, it's a difficult question, and it's an emerging field with computers. And so we may not know what good is yet. And I think that's usually what we end up deciding at the end of the day is this has potential.
I love it.
I'm curious, do you see AI as fundamentally different than other technologies that have influenced music over the years, right? Electric guitars, reverb. There's been a long history of technology we brought into the industry. Is this just a continuation, or is this something fundamentally different?
I don't know, as somebody who identifies on a certain level as a computer musician, I think of technology going all the way back to where we went from voice to an instrument. So I think that there's kind of a long history of technology enhancing our musical abilities and enhancing our ability to express ourselves through a very abstract art. But at the same time, I think AI is opening a lot of potential for novel ways of looking at old problems. And I think that's the way I see it the most useful for, at least in my art. I think about I can look at this certain problem and I can generate a phenomenal amount of material by writing an algorithm or generating something. And then I can sort it out using, say, some sort of classification algorithm and say, these have these characteristics. And then I can pick, most stylistically accurate of what are potentially novel characteristics for a piece of music.
I love it.
That's interesting because it makes me think, like, are you the composer then, or are you the producer? Are you like a producer sitting here with a bunch of different tracks?
Or a programmer, right.
And then picking the best ones?
Yeah, no, it's challenging. Something that comes up a lot is that we have been producing music with algorithms for a long time. And the joke that my undergraduate professor in electronic music, John Gibson, said, when a computer wants to sound human, it just randomizes it. And it's kind of a long-standing problem. And we're getting to the point where no longer will it be quite as random, in the sense that when we're creating new art, we can say we actually are looking for a certain result. And so when I design an algorithm to, say, compose a piece with, I actually know what I want it to sound like. I know the pitch characteristics I want. I know the rhythmic characteristics. And so I want to teach the computer or train the computer in a certain way to generate those materials.
And you mentioned something really interesting. You are personally classically trained musician. As we talk about this, next evolution in music, do you see it affecting and disrupting how musicians get trained? Like, do you think that classical training will mean something else in the next generations as we, embrace some of this computer-generated option?
Yeah, so in the academic field I'm associated with, there's a lot of what we call interactive art, where somebody plays an instrument and the computer responds, quote unquote, in a very loose application of that term, to that sound, and then generates new sounds based upon it. And increasingly, we're finding the professionals who want to have solo careers are embracing that technology on a certain level. Not all of them. If these are people who want to engage with the development of technology, they want to be solo artists, and they would love to do a recital where they can walk in, set down their laptop, and play a concert. And those people are really fantastic and interesting. There will always be Hilary Hahn and Joshua Bell playing their solo pieces with orchestra and won't do electronics, and that's wonderful and beautiful. We need that too. And I think at a certain level, technology is developing in ways that we can educate people in more specific terminology. Like, you played this in a certain way with the computer feedback. When I used to teach lots of lessons, I often would use a sonogram to help the student understand how their timbre worked. And then they could understand, okay, I have a lot of dark sounds, the lower frequencies in their sound, or a lot of high sounds. And they could learn and practice, how does that sound? And they would get visual feedback. And I think AI has a lot of promise for that.
I'm curious on that last point. When you start talking about dark sounds, and these sounds like distinctly human domains, right? That, the AI doesn't have a personality. It doesn't have preferences, at least in the way I think we think of them as humans. One, is that a correct assumption? And two, if you just gave an AI an opportunity, can it just create on its own, or is it always kind of influenced by the artist who kind of trains it at the beginning of this process?
Yeah, just like humans, the computer is influenced by what we feed it. So, of course, I've been fed music my whole life, like most people who are alive today, and I have developed a certain set of individual preferences and tastes. I don't think computers, from what I've done, can develop that level of preference and taste, that kind of novel individualness. But what we can do is we can select what material the computer is going to choose from. So if we say, I want something that's in a Bachian style, we can select a lot of Bach pieces. Or if I want to generate something that's completely new, I might compose something by hand and then generate variations upon it and then feed that into the system and see what comes out.
So as my daughter always says, if she wants to create in the genre that I like dad sad country music,
exactly.
we can train it to do that.
Totally train it to do that.
Well, let's say we can train it to learn 3 chords and the truth.
I love it.
Well, this kind of reminds me of bringing it a little bit to the business world in some way. This reminds me of the notion. I think I read that in movies and cinemas and TV shows. I mean, the entertainment industry is booming, and I think even you and I, Aaron, talked about this a little bit. That like you can teach a machine a little bit about soundtracks. So like I can feed in a bunch of romantic sounding musics, or the thrillers. That music that something's about to happen. We all know it. How do we know it? We feel it because we've seen all these movies and we've heard the music that kind of precedes something dramatic happening. We can train machines machines to help us do that kind of work. Is that a field that is growing fast? Like, what do you think that that's where it's going to infuse? I can see a lot of cost savings there specifically.
Yes, no, you're right that it would be incredibly cost saving for production studios to do that. I think there's kind of two elements that go into it, and one is the psychological element of a computer made that, not a human. And there's always, especially even with my music, there's that reaction where some people are like, but you didn't do it. And I think that there's a certain point where that cachet of a human doing something will always have some sort of financial value, especially for prestige institutions. But I think at the same level, you all have talked a lot about training data and understanding that. When we talk about how we put music together, we would say, what are the elements of the music? From a very theoretical standpoint, as in like first year theory. And we would say, what are the notes that are being played? How are they combined? What instruments are being played? What are the rhythms? And we would break it down to that element. And so, yeah, we could generate, especially as systems get more sophisticated and faster, we could generate really interesting soundtracks, and we could have a computer play them because there are these phenomenal sample libraries. And I think that it's an interesting disruption in the sense that we all felt like our creative selves as humans are significant and important, and yet this computer might be able to do it too.
Faster and cheaper, that's for
yes.
sure. Yeah.
I mean, and I would think the substitution effect comes to mind here, that even if you need some creative people, you're going to need less of them in a world where you're enabled by AI and technology here. Is that true? And if so, is there angst in the composing industry or the musician industry about what AI is able to do?
I think there's a very human hope in music, is that people will always want to go to concerts and see people play. I think because it is very satisfying. I think at the same time, as all industries have the opportunity to say, let's find faster, cheaper ways of producing more and more art, we can expect to see that more. And I don't think there's a lot of angst in the industry because I don't think a computer could ever quite accumulate my life skills.
Well, I just, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was reflecting on everything that you just said, Aaron, and I just came back, 3 nights ago, I saw Tears for Fears live in concert, and I've been waiting, arguably my whole life to watch them live, and I don't think I would ever go if that was a computer generating those sounds, so.
Yes, but of course, ABBA now has holograms playing in London.
Yes,
so.
they do. I'm tempted to go and see ABBA in London, actually.
Actually, and that has always been fascinating to me about, again, thinking as a business person, but like copyright and ownership, and that if you can bring up, I mean, they're still alive, but you can imagine Tupac was the one that they did an original hologram, and you can start to create music and sample over previous artists. What does this say about intellectual property? Who owns it? Who controls it? Does Elvis get revived here and starts putting out new music because an AI does it?
I mean, do we want more new Beatles stuff coming out? I think we all kind of want to, but
I think there'd be a market for it.
I know there would be a market for it for sure. Aaron, I wanted to kind of segue a little bit and ask you a little bit about your current position. I think you are doing some exciting things at Music Labs. Can you tell us a little bit about that? For context, a very different domain, a very different use case for music, but one that is in desperate need today. So tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so I work with a company called Music Labs, and we create interventions essentially for our clients, which we're getting ready to launch. Anybody can be a client. And they are basically videos, and we use research and psychology to create videos that interact, that you breathe with, and therefore anxiety treatments. Ours is special because we focus on music primarily, which is why I'm at the company, because I am literally an expert in what they need.
That is fascinating. So how does the AI and the technology interact here with the music and then with the kind of assistance that it provides people under anxious or anxiety situations?
Yeah. So in general, in the field of healthcare, this is becoming a thing. And the idea of generating content, is because people are going to watch these videos and maybe they feel really good after one, they want to watch another one. And we need to be able to generate a lot of content. And so the idea of generative art or a generative practice to where we are creating a phenomenal amount of content over time is really important. And different industries and different companies inside of this have different ways of dealing with it. And I think that there are a lot of approaches. Some people are generating everything. Some people are simply pairing up AI with existing music and saying, this is your mood, this is what you like, we're going to link it up. And other people are writing algorithms that generate content. So it's a really interesting field. It's kind of an exciting time to be in it because it's emerging, but at the same time, there's a dramatic need, not only with the pandemic, but our company works directly with refugees in the Middle East. And it's a profound tool for them to have a small, very easy intervention for them to breathe along with these videos that is very low cost.
It's incredible. I mean, given the shortage in everything that we know around us in terms of support for mental health issues and people under extreme stressful situations, and the fact that, technology and everybody has a phone and technology is changing, it seems like there's a lot of promise there to help people in need.
I hadn't thought about this, but are we going to be in the near future here when I listen to Spotify, which right now uses AI and predictive algorithms to choose songs for me, that it will just move to making songs for me, and it will be truly a individualized, cultivated music experience?
Yeah.
Well, interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. I think the idea of generating a pop song, what AI mostly does now is pitch and rhythm, and it does that well. The idea of all the additional elements that go into the pop track record, the production techniques and all of that, we don't quite have that sorted out yet. We're very beginning. If you watch the Beatles Get Back documentary, they were able to start piecing things apart using machine learning and take some of these sessions that nobody had done anything but record and very complicated and get good, scores out of them basically. And it's a very interesting technique. You can select different sounds and parts. But we're a ways from being able to say generate random person, random style, and it not be performed by a dinky little computer voice going bleep, 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 which is like canonical computer music 101, which we have fortunately migrated from as technology has grown.
I'm surprised you said this about pop music. I just figured pop would be the easiest to just put an algorithm and it would just replicate it, because so much of it seems like it's replicated.
Yeah, I think it depends on how you're listening. If you are in psychologically, we listen this way. In psychoacoustics, we talk about pitches first, and then other elements start to come. A lot of the elements that make pop albums sound so present and so forward is the fact that there's a lot of other stuff going on than just the people singing, unless, going back to the country music, you're listening to the Rick Rubin, Johnny Cash albums, in which case it's just him as loud as possible, which I love.
Wonderful. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I just wanted to turn our attention to kind of one of the questions, Aaron, that we ask on this podcast is good disruption, bad disruption, no disruption. And we started to touch upon some of the good aspects of this technology. Do you see any bad aspects of this technology, things we should be wary of or concerned about as creative AI continues to develop?
Yeah, I think ownership is a big thing, and ownership is a problem now in the industry and has been for a long time. We live in a litigious society, which is part of it, but also there's this notion that somehow there are boundaries or rules on who is making what and how those notes are configured, and that those notes can only be configured by some person in some way. And I think that it could be a potentially dangerous tool to start saying, well, we generated this piece based on all of these other pieces, and it sounds new, but it's all of those elements being reconstituted. And I think that there could be legal issues there, and I think there could be a certain amount of feeling of theft as an artist, and a feeling as though, did they pay for the royalties of that, or did they just, download a bunch of albums and then generate new music based on it? And who owns that and who's doing that? I think that's very disruptive, and we have a very complicated legal system when it comes to music. A lot of people aren't experts in music, and so they make decisions as not experts, and it's complicated. At the same time, the disruption of force of jobs is interesting to me. I don't know. It is something that has been hurting in the music world because, 50 years ago, if you went to a restaurant and they had music, there was a person playing, and now somebody's just got a record, or a radio.
Spotify. They have Spotify on.
And they're just playing Spotify. And so, it's a different world for people who want to make their living playing their instrument for people. And it's very easy to get music for free in our society. And I wonder how much AI will influence how people conceive of the creative process. When a computer can do it, why should I pay for a human to do it?
And there's some other risks and dangers there in the sense of, for instance, going back to the images that we were talking about earlier, some of those technologies, the Imagine by Google and the DALL-E 2 by OpenAI, some of them are holding back on releasing some of the code and really opening this technology to everybody from this fear of deep fake, this idea that some people would be harmed. You can create images that nobody wants to see, or that you're really going to put somebody in a weaker position. Fake news is already a problem. There's lack of trust when it comes to the news outlets and everything that you find out there. There is a danger where this just creates even more of that, and you just don't know what you can trust and what you cannot.
Well, that's got me scared now.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to, Aaron, go back to the, I'll call it the copyright or intellectual property question. It strikes me like that's been an issue in music for a long time. I'm old enough to remember the old Vanilla Ice sampling, obviously, in my opinion, sampling Queen, but trying to argue that he was not sampling Queen. Is it just a continuation of this long-standing argument about sampling, or is it, again, kind of fundamentally different here in an AI world?
I think it's fundamentally different because we can produce content that may sound different, but is generated upon somebody's work of art. And so where does the ownership of that art begin and end? And I think it's not something that in my world is like nobody really worries about. Nobody steals my art. Nobody's like out to get me. I publish my own music. I do it all myself. And but at the same time, there's a lot of people who want to make a lot of money making music. And those people usually are not necessarily the performers, but they're the people who own the rights to the music. And so they want to pursue avenues to protect the rights that they own of other people's work. So artist rights are really important in this.
Yeah. I mean, the hope, and maybe to flip it and just to be optimistic a little bit and to bring out the good side in things, just to balance it out. This idea, going back to the hope and the promise that we can see new patterns and identify new ways to teach people, maybe people like me who's self-identified as non-artistic, maybe somebody can teach me how to become more artistic or to possess more creative or to learn a little bit more about the fundamentals in a way that I acquire something that I maybe wasn't born with or I didn't think that I had in me, and now I learn and get trained to do it. So there is some excitement in me about that. Yeah.
I think coming into this, I might have been falling more on the bad disruption side. There's just something innate about human creativity that I feel if it was lost, that we've lost something as a society. But I think you've made some excellent observations about how this is one, technology has always been in the music and other fields here, and so this is a continuation, and it can be enhancing to the human creative process. That it needn't be just purely a substitute for it, and that's true, I think, of a lot of technologies. We might fear autonomy or other forms of giving control to machines, but done right, it can actually be a blessing and an enhancement. Yael, where do you stand?
Yeah, so listening to this conversation and thinking about it for a few days now, and in general, my sense is that as unbelievably breathtaking and exciting as it is, I actually don't see it as a disruption so much. I would come down.
You're going on no disruption?
No disruption,
Ooh,
our
it's
third
always
category.
Good when we get one of those.
Yes, a controversial one and not one we use often. Because I think that the technology, the existence of the technology will continue to thrive with the artists and the humans there side by side. So it's like an enhancer, like the synthesizer of the 80s, right? That
now you're dating yourself.
Thank you, yes. I said Tears for Fears. I've already dated
that's
myself.
True.
Right?
That's true. It's already out of the
It's already out.
Now.
That is out. But think about the studio that we're in and our amazing producers and what they're using upstairs to kind of make sure that we sound great, and the ways in which AI is evolving. It's almost like giving opportunity to new creative initiatives. I think, while I'm not an artist myself, I love TV and media and movies and what's going on in on Netflix and on the streaming channels and all the creativity there with everything, with all the new movies and new ideas. It just feels like it's just inspiring others to do even more. So I don't see it as much as a disruption, but an enabler that will allow the field to continue for years to come.
But a good no disruption is what I'm...
But a good no disruption, yes.
A
natural way in which, as you guys pointed out, a natural way in which these kind of creative fields evolve.
Well, this has really been a fascinating discussion. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today. A huge help to us because this is not our area of expertise by any means. Fascinating work you're doing in many different dimensions there. As always, let me thank our producer, Gary, our researcher, Becky.
Oh, yes.
And again, of course, as always, I'd like to end by thanking Mark Wahlberg. We're still waiting on his version of Good Disruption.
Maybe we can actually create it ourselves.
Brilliant. All right, Aaron, we're going to reach out to you about sampling from Mark Wahlberg to create a version of his Good Vibration
exactly,
song.
for this show.
For this podcast. That is repeat with Good Disruption instead. So if you can work on that for us, we will happily share that with our guests. All right, thank you, everyone, and we look forward to joining us on our next podcast.
Good Disruption is a podcast from the University of Virginia Darden School of Business.